He was 32 years old. He had just raised the price of a life-saving drug by 5,000% overnight, and he was sitting in front of a congressional committee that wanted answers. And he smirked. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic gesture, a full, contemptuous smirk, aimed directly at the United States Congress, before he invoked his Fifth Amendment right and refused to answer a single question. This is the story of Martin Shkreli, the man America called the most hated man in the country. The hedge fund manager who bought a 62-year-old AIDS medication and raised its price from $13.50 to $750 per pill, overnight, without warning, without apology, and then went on television and told you he didn't charge enough. Martin Shkreli was born in Brooklyn in 1983. His parents were Albanian and Croatian immigrants who worked as janitors. There was no wealth, no privilege, no head start. Just a kid from Brooklyn who was obsessed, genuinely, intensely obsessed, with two things: money and attention. He was brilliant in a narrow, dangerous way. He had an instinctive grasp of financial markets and pharmaceutical regulation that most people spend decades trying to acquire. He dropped out of Baruch College, talked his way into an internship at a major hedge fund, and by his mid-20s had founded his own hedge fund, MSMB Capital. He was arrogant from the beginning, confrontational. He sent antagonistic emails to CEOs of pharmaceutical companies whose stocks he was shorting. He posted on forums under his real name, arguing that his fund was producing extraordinary returns. He seemed to crave conflict the way other people crave approval, but he knew how the pharmaceutical industry worked, and he saw an opportunity that most people had missed entirely. Here is the business model that made Martin Shkreli infamous, and it is important to understand it clearly, because it was not illegal. It was a gap in the system, a loophole so wide you could drive a truck through it. The American pharmaceutical market has a mechanism to encourage innovation. If a company invests the time and money to develop a new drug, they receive patent protection. Typically 20 years during which no competitor can copy their formula and undercut their price. But Daraprim was not a new drug. Daraprim, chemical name pyrimethamine, was developed in 1952. It had been off patent for decades. It was the standard of care for a parasitic infection called toxoplasmosis, a disease that is particularly deadly in patients with compromised immune systems, including people with AIDS and cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. It was a 63-year-old drug. It cost $13.50 per pill. It was cheap because it was old, and the market for it was small. And that is exactly why Shkreli wanted it. In a small market with a drug that patients absolutely depend on, a drug where there is no substitute, no alternative, no way to simply switch to a competitor, you have almost unlimited pricing power. The patients need it. Their doctors need it. And if you control the only supply, you control the price. In August 2015, Shkreli's company, Turing Pharmaceuticals, acquired the manufacturing license for Daraprim from Impax Laboratories for $55 million. 5 weeks later, the price went from $13.50 per pill to $750 per pill, a 5,455% increase. Overnight. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Infectious disease doctors wrote open letters demanding answers. Patient advocacy groups issued emergency statements. Presidential candidates from both parties condemned the price hike on the campaign trail. Hillary Clinton called it outrageous. Bernie Sanders sent Shkreli a letter demanding he appear before Congress. And Shkreli went on television. He was everywhere. Bloomberg, CNBC, ABC. He gave interview after interview, and in every single one he was the same. Smug, dismissive, utterly unapologetic. He told reporters that Daraprim was underpriced at $13.50 and that $750 was a fair price given the value it provided. He said the profits would be used to fund research into a better version of the drug. He said critics didn't understand the pharmaceutical industry. He also spent $2 million to purchase the sole existing copy of the Wu-Tang Clan album Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. Not because he particularly loved the music, but because he could. Because he wanted people to know he could. He live-streamed himself on the internet. He taunted journalists on Twitter. He called a female journalist and I will not repeat the exact phrase, but it was vile and threatening enough that the FBI investigated. Martin Shkreli was performing. He was playing a character, the villain, the man who didn't care what you thought. And the more people hated him, the more he leaned into it. But while the world was focused on the price hike, federal investigators were looking at something else entirely. In December 2015, just 3 months after the Daraprim story broke, Martin Shkreli was arrested. Not for the drug pricing, not for Daraprim, for something that had been happening years earlier. At his hedge fund, MSMB Capital, and at his previous pharmaceutical company, Retrofin. The charges were securities fraud and conspiracy. And the details were almost comically brazen. Shkreli had raised approximately $3 million from investors for MSMB Capital. He lost it. All of it. On bad trades. He lost his investors' money through a series of spectacularly wrong bets, and then, instead of telling them, he simply did not tell them. He sent them fabricated account statements showing gains that had never happened. He lied, repeatedly and systematically. When he ran out of ways to hide the losses, he started a new pharmaceutical company, Retrofin, and used it as a personal piggy bank to pay back his MSMB investors. He took Retrofin money that belonged to Retrofin shareholders, and used it to silence the people who were threatening to sue him over MSMB. He called these payments consulting agreements. They were not consulting agreements. They were hush money, paid with other people's money. Retrofin's board eventually discovered what had happened. They fired Shkreli and sued him. He sued them back. The litigation was epic and messy and ugly. And then the federal government stepped in. The trial of Martin Shkreli began in June 2017 in Brooklyn Federal Court. Prosecutors laid out a meticulous case. Investors testified about the false statements they had received. Former Retrofin executives described watching Shkreli loot the company. Financial records showed the fabricated account statements in detail. Shkreli represented himself as a misunderstood genius. His lawyer argued that whatever mistakes had been made, his investors had actually ended up making money in the end, because Shkreli had eventually made good on his losses through his Retrofin and Turing shares. The harm, the defense argued, was ultimately zero. It was an unusual argument, and the jury was only partially persuaded. On August 4, 2017, the jury found Shkreli guilty on 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. They acquitted him on 5 other counts. Shkreli smirked. On March 9, 2018, he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit $7.36 million in assets, including his Wu-Tang Clan album, which the government later sold to an anonymous buyer. But the legal consequences did not end with the criminal conviction. In a separate civil case brought by the Federal Trade Commission, the state of New York, and several other states, Shkreli was found liable for antitrust violations related to the Daraprim price hike. The strategy Turing had used, restricting distribution of the drug so that generic manufacturers couldn't get samples to run required bioequivalence tests, and blocking rivals from accessing a key ingredient, was found to be illegal anti-competitive conduct. In January 2022, a federal judge ordered Shkreli to pay $64.6 million in disgorgement, money he had earned from the anti-competitive scheme, and banned him from the pharmaceutical industry for life. Turing Pharmaceuticals, which had renamed itself Vira, separately paid $40 million to settle the FTC case. Shkreli was released from federal prison in May 2022, after serving 4 years of his 7-year sentence. He had spent his final months completing his sentence in a halfway house. Since his release, he has continued to make noise on social media. He has launched podcasts, he has dabbled in cryptocurrency, he has tried persistently to remain relevant. He even claimed from prison to have developed a cure for COVID-19, a claim that was not taken seriously by anyone in the medical community. He is banned from the pharmaceutical industry for life. He is a convicted felon, and he is, by most accounts, completely unbothered by any of it. Here is what you need to understand about the Daraprim price hike. The drug's price eventually did come down, not because Shkreli or Turing chose to lower it, but because a competing manufacturer entered the market and began selling a compounded version for pennies per dose. But in the months between the price hike and that competition arriving, every hospital in America that treated toxoplasmosis patients was forced to scramble. Hospitals rationed the drug. Doctors called Turing begging for discounts. Patients and their families navigated a Byzantine system of special access programs that Turing claimed would ensure no one went without. A claim that infectious disease doctors said, in practice, did not always work as advertised. Real people, already fighting for their lives, were caught in the middle of a pricing strategy designed by a man who saw their illness as a market opportunity. The drug pricing crisis that Shkreli ignited did not end with Daraprim. His model, acquire an old off-patent drug with a small but captive patient population, restrict supply and raise the price to whatever the market could bear, was widely noticed. By other companies, by other executives. His tactics were studied, copied, and refined. Martin Shkreli did not invent pharmaceutical price gouging, but he made it impossible to ignore. And in doing so, he lit a fire that is still burning. The ledger is dark, and it always finds a way to balance. I'm your host. This is Dark Ledger. If this story opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because next week we go even deeper.